In March, they're going to start letting people invest in the new volcano bonds. So we should see a pricing on that between March 15th and March 21st. So this is extraordinary innovation coming to Bitcoin. It's really the moment where securities laws are now going to be rewritten based on having a country with Bitcoin as legal tender. So that'll attract a lot of capital to El Salvador, which is positioning itself as the Wall Street of Bitcoin. And for this region, I think it'll very quickly mean a huge bump in the economy, GDP, capital coming into the country. It's very funny because last week Fitch, the rating agency, downgraded El Zonte. Rating agencies
El Salvador.
El Salvador. You know, rating agencies are notoriously late, lagging indicators. They tend to be about between 1 and 2 years behind the actual curve. And so this is a classic situation where they've come in and downgraded a country that's now just on the verge of, with GDP exploding, tourism exploding. They're going to recapitalize the entire country with volcano bonds. They'll be debt-free probably in 10 years. And so that's coming in March. I think that's going to really rock the world.
I also want to add, my observations of this volcano bond and the process up to it. The fact that the president, Najib Bukele, has managed to keep closest to him in this whole process the best Bitcoiners out there. Samson Mao and Bitfinex have done an amazing job. We've been able to observe it firsthand, and they are just extraordinary, and it just gives me a lot of hope that we're all going to make it, right? This is actually going to work. Our conversation with the president also, we walked away from that meeting with him convinced that he's a Bitcoin maximalist, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. And he's got the best people around him. So I'm pretty confident about that, and that gives me hope for the future of what's coming for Hyperbitcoinization. It's happening for real.
Well, it didn't get downgraded because it's not yet listed, it's not yet trading. They're talking about the existing sovereign debt. And like I said, the rating agencies tend to be a year or more behind the curve, behind the actual news. Remember, in a stock like Enron, Wall Street gave it a AAA rating buy the day before it collapsed, or James Cramer was on CNBC promoting Bear Stearns the day before it collapsed. And Wall Street rating analysts are really tend to be the worst source of security analysis you can possibly find. It's a quid pro quo game. It's pay to play. It's what's called soft money, where you get the rating you pay for. It's payola. It's very corrupt. So I guess Fitch, like Moody's or S&P, they're on the take. They do whatever you pay them to do, and I guess the U.S. and the IMF is so insecure about El Salvador becoming a monster powerhouse in finance that they decided they were going to waste some taxpayer money bribing some rating agencies. But they're not in a fiat world. What's it to them? They just print more. They don't care. The fact that they cause all this rampant inflation and heartache in the heartland, they don't care about that either. So this is what Bitcoin fixes. And we have it here in El Salvador, and it's very exciting that it's becoming legal tender. It's legal tender now, and what the very near-term future will bring.
I think President Bukele said it best on Twitter when he said, guess what, El Salvador DGAF, when they downgraded. And if you read their rationale, it's a tiny amount. It's $800 million that they have to roll over next year. That's puny in the global, $100 trillion bond market. It's nothing. It's it's a joke that they would downgrade it, especially in an economy which you see, if you come here, is booming. There are tourists everywhere. Hotels are difficult to find because it's totally booked up. People are spending big here, and they're coming in, and so much investment is coming into the economy rapidly. It's a joke. So, of course, but the way the fiat world works is nobody will have to get fired or demoted from getting it wrong completely.
You know, and of course, when you're looking at sovereign economics and doing credit analysis, the debt to GDP number and the percentage is always looked at. And in this country, it's higher than it was 5 years ago. In the U.S., of course, it's over 100%. But a lot of it has to do with how you define GDP. So in the UK a few years ago, to make the debt look smaller compared to GDP, they started to include heroin use and prostitution in the way that the country calculates its GDP, just to make the debt look smaller. I would imagine that in the US last week, when they were giving out crack pipes to everybody, that's a way to boost GDP. They'll include crack in the GDP. It'll make the debt look smaller, right? But in El Salvador, they don't worship crack. They're not crackheads here. They're not degenerates like you find in the White House and in Washington D.C. These are good people. They're not degenerates.
Actually, if you look at the global debt to GDP, the average is about 97% debt to GDP across all nations across the world. Higher, the developed nations, the richest nations, is even higher than that. They're over 100%. But El Salvador is at about 84.5% right now, 85%. So they're actually trending. They're doing better than a lot of economies around the world.
That number's going to go to zero in the next 5, 6, 7 years, thanks to volcano bonds. He knows all the players. He knows. We heard some very funny stories about some of the shit coins that were trying to get into El Salvador.
Not from him. We've heard it from other people.
Expose them.
Yeah, just so you understand. He didn't talk about them.
No.
But he's a Bitcoin maximalist, and he's really smart. Okay, so you understand. When he tweets one way, he's a public figure, just like Max will go up on stage and shout and scream. But he's very, very intelligent, very smart, and very calm, and. He gets Bitcoin deeply. We talked extensively about that. That was a lot of our conversation, was talking about how he came about Bitcoin. I've read his biography in Spanish that was written back in 2018, but it covers him back to 2012 when he's first starting out as running for mayor for Nueva Cuscatlan, which is outside of San Salvador, before he became mayor of San Salvador. And all of these quotes from him back in 2012 were, I asked him, I thought he was maybe a Bitcoiner then, because he spoke like a Bitcoiner, and what his concerns were all economic and about sort of that fiat problems of cantillionaires and the fact that we should attract here to El Salvador. The fact that the number one priority of most people here up until the President Bukele was that people wanted to leave El Salvador. They wanted to go to America, and that was the dream of most Salvadorans. Now he needs to swap that around and get all the diaspora. There's 3 million Salvadorans living in America. The dream needs to be here, and the economic reality needs to be here. So why not build an economy that they want to return to? Why not build an economy and a culture where it's safe and good to build your wealth? And I think you see that. We've met many Salvadorans here who actually live in America and are returning here, or they're visiting here and thinking of moving back, and they can't believe they came back from Los Angeles mostly, and they want to see with their own two eyes, is this real? Because this was never part of the story that they had growing up, but now it's swapped around. So that's in my opinion, that's what is the number one thing for him.
Bitcoin City, it's, as I understand it, it's a free enterprise zone. So there's no capital gains tax, there's no income tax, there's no payroll tax. And it will be, of course, on top of all the legislation and laws that are being rewritten in the securities front. That'll be all Bitcoin centric. So it's going to be a destination for people, I think, to start their companies, to relocate their companies, and something like a Singapore, for example, it just becomes a magnet for capital and for entrepreneurs. And I haven't heard a single person say anything negative about it. That's the first I've heard anyone say anything negative about it, because it's such an obviously good thing. But I mean, I have not heard a single naysayer.
But also, as Max mentioned, the president will be introducing a package of new laws in the next week, perhaps 2 weeks. And it's deep and comprehensive. Like, it's massive across the board, and it will, after this, you'll see what's going to happen. The entire economy, not just Bitcoin City, is going to become like a Singapore. This is going to happen within the next year. This is it's a radical transformation of the economy, and it's happening right now. As I think Jack Dorsey said something like that in an interview recently with Michael Saylor, is like, the future is happening right now in El Salvador, and it is. When you're here, you feel it and you know it. And this guy is serious, and he's committed to economic liberty, and you'll see. Watch what he does, not what people in the U.S. corporate media say. Just watch what he does, and you'll see for yourselves. Encountered both, but many who were born here and they go to America. That's like how people have lived here for the past few decades post-Civil War. Is there's no opportunity here. A lot of the economy was based on a model of economic hitmen, essentially, which is that we take all your resources, including the most valuable of them, which is your human resources, the people, the brightest minds of your economy. We take them, bring them to America, and you get, the criminals we trained in our California prisons at like MS-13. So that's the trade that's been going on for the past few decades. And, the political situation has, they have a similar situation here up until President Bukele, similar to the United States, of two parties control everything and they pretend to be against each other, but really what they're doing is like dividing up the booty and like living like cantillionaires. So that is intentionally over. That system is over, where you want to return here now because the opportunity is here. Do you want to live amongst fecal matter in Los Angeles, or do you want to live where, with your coconuts and surfing and good times happening? The future is happening here. Jack Dorsey is telling you the future's happening here. What are you doing in Los Angeles?
Anywhere else, the conversation runs the full spectrum. So you have people that are just finding out about it, people who have been into it, and people who are zealots. And all across the board, everyone we've met in the government is a Bitcoin maximalist, understands the technology profoundly, talks about the technology brilliantly, and they're very excited about it. The people on the street, again, you find those who are definitely into it. They talk about it. Then you have the curious. But the fact is that the population had 70% unbanked before Bitcoin, and now I think that's completely reversed. It's 70% is now banked thanks to Bitcoin. There are more Bitcoin wallets and users in El Salvador than there were users of the banking system in total combined with all banks in El Salvador. So there's been a complete flip in less than 6 months, and that's a remarkable transformation in less than 6 months. So within that group, you have people that they got their airdrop of Bitcoin and they're still checking it out, they're still looking at it, they're still finding out about it. I know that with groups like Swan Bitcoin, they are on the ground with education. So education is always appreciated. Bitcoin Magazine is always interested in doing education. And we're also interested in promoting education. There's the Hope House here in El Zonte, which is Bitcoin Beach, and they're constantly doing education and meetups. We've got Paxville in San Salvador. They just opened up a Bitcoin house. They're doing round-the-clock educational seminars. They're booked for weeks on end. People want to get there and get educated about it. So as you know, it's a virtuous cycle. Once you start thinking about Bitcoin, it changes the way you think about lots of stuff, and you want more and more and more, and then the community gets stronger and stronger, and so it's a virtuous cycle, and you see that playing out right here in a country that's made Bitcoin legal tender. So it's like a Bitcoin meetup times 1,000, powered by volcanoes, where you can go surfing.
And I would add as well that, yes, I think there were some protests in San Salvador, but again, like, you know, that I think from my observation, it appears to just be politics. You know, you don't want your opponent to succeed, right? In like transforming the economy and turning it into the new Singapore, where you have presided over a dilapidated state where people flee for the past 30, 40 years. Like, why would you want to be exposed as like a bad leader and a fraud that your parties were for decades, right? So that's just natural. On top of that, like here in El Zonte, the fact that the banking system, as Max mentioned, 70% of the population here was unbanked. And that ironically kind of drove in Bitcoin Beach area, which is very famous for surfing. So you had a lot of tourists coming here solely for surfing over the past decades. And we spoke to a shop owner who she was telling us that, you know, she ended up getting Bitcoin in her shop because she had so many Europeans here. And the Europeans would come and they had euros. There's no ATM because the banking system doesn't have ATMs provided for these sort of poorer communities outside of the cities here. So there was no cash, and people would come in and want to pay for their food or coffee and from Europe, and all they would have is euros, and they didn't have any dollars. So she would have to say, well, you'd have to go to El Tunco, which is like 20 minutes away, and there's an ATM there. So she started to get asked, do you accept Bitcoin? How about Bitcoin? So that was like the fact that the banking system here was so crap is part of the reason why Bitcoin adoption was driven. And you know, in terms of how the perception here, of course, this is Bitcoin Beach. Mike Peterson and Chimbetta, you know, Roman Martinez and Jorge Valenzuela have done an amazing job, extreme education on the ground, helping people out here. So it's hyper-Bitcoinized here. Like it's as a Bitcoiner for a long time, this is like a fantasy world here. You almost can't believe this is true, that you're not hallucinating, that it's just hyper-Bitcoinized. There's no question, there's no explanation. You don't need to explain it, they just get it.
Using the Moon Wallet, M-U-U-N, the Moon Wallet, because it's just easy. The Chiva wallet is for citizens, so they're using that. I haven't used it. I'm not a citizen at this moment, not quite yet. There's a plethora of different wallets being used, and people are very quick to use Bitcoin for payments because it's just really handy. People, you know, tend to carry their phones around. They don't necessarily want to carry cash around. That's one thing. I mean, you're on the beach, and you go in the water. Your clothes are on the beach or what have you, and you want to leave a bunch of cash right there? No, you know, it's perfect. You know, you just have it locked up on your phone, and you can use it. So it's just very natural. You know, at some point, what's going to happen in the world, you know, and it happened when we saw the internet. The internet went from, in 1996, when I started my .com company in Los Angeles, the Hollywood Stock Exchange, the internet was still a novelty. Paul Krugman was writing about it, that it wouldn't have any impact greater than the fax machine. And people were doubtful that the internet was actually going to succeed. And people were trying to grapple with, like, well, how does it work? You know, what's a packet? You know, this is too complicated. And then it hits that inflection point, it becomes ubiquitous, and now we're in an internet world. So Bitcoin, similarly, what we're seeing here is what we're going to see in the rest of the world in a few years. That is, it's just accepted. People are not bogged down with trying to even know how it works or why it works. They just use it because it's part of the environment. It's part of the ecosystem. It becomes ubiquitous. It's as natural as using any other technology that becomes ingrained and inculcated in your day-to-day life. So that's what we're seeing right here. Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization lives here.
I also want to add about Chivo. we've have friends. I've actually made payments to friend on Chivo, both on chain and Lightning. So it worked instantly. They have hired a new Alpha Point, to come in and revamp everything. And one thing I've heard from people who use it is the remarkable thing is that there's zero commission. Like, basically you're getting like the spot price for Bitcoin. So, when we get our citizenship and I could start to use it, I would consider that for the basically free trading. So it is, people have pointed out, Bitcoiners who I know have pointed out how remarkable that you can get this without zero commission, no spread, no nothing.
Yeah, and you're definitely starting to see now an impact on the remittance market. So $400 million a year in remittances, 10%, up to 10% of that or so would go to Western Union and other intermediaries. So that's $40 or $50 million now that's just going to go right into people's pockets. It's not going to go into the intermediaries. That's a big chunk of change. And so the whole dynamics and economics shift because Bitcoin is perfect money.
And one more thing is, I was actually part of that Lightning torch. So when back in the reckless days of Lightning, and everybody talks about Lightning, is debated all the time, and theoretical debates about whether or not it's work, is it possible, is this a joke, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's used everywhere here in El Zonte. It's ubiquitous. So it's like, it's not theoretical here. It just is. And so it's amazing to walk into a world off of Bitcoin Twitter and step into the future that many say can't exist, but it's actually happening right here.